Hi, and welcome to the 2020 edition of the Brisbane Open House Design Talks. Today we have 4 talks, and the first one is Essential Natural Spaces. I'm here to introduce the chair. Her name's Natalie Hoyts. Natalie is an award-winning urban designer who's worked on projects around the world, from the Caribbean to China, from Germany to New Zealand, from Canada to Singapore and around Australia. Over many years, she has helped design and master plan new cities and new town squares, tourist resorts, airports, university campuses, and public spaces. Natalie has degrees in architecture, urban geography, urban planning, and design. Among her career highlights are leading a number of high-profile projects that have and are transforming the urban landscape, such as the Future South Bank Master Plan, Brisbane City's Reach Front Master Plan, and Rockhampton's CBD redevelopment framework. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, those of us here in studio. It's great to see a few people here and at home online. And welcome to the first Brisbane Open House Design Talk series for 2020, Essential Natural Spaces. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this event is taking place and acknowledge their elders, both past, present, and emerging. We are incredibly lucky today to be joined by an expert panel, and I'm very delighted to introduce them to you today. So we'll start firstly with Cathryn. So Cathryn is a director of Urban Enquiry. Cathryn is an award-winning designer with an extensive experience in the development of highly complex urban projects. She has worked at a diverse range of project scales, both public sector and private clients, including significant leadership roles in large-scale urban regeneration projects in the UK and across Australia. Next, we've got Damian sporting the lovely blue shirt over there. Damian is a director of one of the founding members of Lat 27, a Brisbane-based design studio who have recently set up in Melbourne as well. Lat 27 shape inspirational, contextually rich places of enduring quality. He spent over 29 years, that doesn't belie his age in any way, designing public and private environments along Australia's eastern coastline, including stints in the UK and Asia. Finally, introducing Simon White, Head of Design at Aria Property Group, where he has been since 2013. As a registered architect, Simon oversees all external design teams and drives Aria's creative direction across apartments, retail, and public realm projects. Prior to joining Aria, he established and grew an award-winning national architectural design practice for 14 years. So we do have a great panel, and we've got a lot to talk about. So Brisbane Open House is really that special time of year where we all get the chance to celebrate Brisbane's built environment, architecture, and city. So today we're not only talking about architecture, but specifically the green and the natural elements that are so important to the livability and health and sustainability of our city. So, of course, this Brisbane Open House event is quite different from those in past years, and 2020 is quite different from any year that we've had on record. And in saying that, COVID has really shed very sharp focus on the value and the importance of natural spaces in our cities. And we've seen firsthand, and most of us have experienced, just how critical those natural spaces are to support good mental health and physical well-being. And we combine that with the ever-mounting interest around mitigating climate change, reducing the impacts of urban heat. And so we are absolutely talking about a very topical and relevant and very important topic today. So, guys, I guess I'll just throw to you and just say, essential natural spaces. How essential are natural spaces to our city? Who wants to launch with that?
I'll have a crack. Yeah, the word essential is really good as a way to start the topic. And I think we'll keep looping back to that because what is it that drives the way we engage with place and cities? And so essentially, at a human level, you know, it's all about the senses. I think from our perspective, thinking about the creative, how we observe how people interact with public space. If you're in a really bland environment, we all have been there, and you're just disengaged with anything that, in terms of smell or light or anything of that nature, you'll just tune down. And what research is showing now is that level of disconnection with place and nature as a result of that is leading to an increase in mental health issues around the globe, and particularly with young people. So part of our role as creatives here is to try and find ways to make great places to live, and that involves not just the buildings but the places in between. So I think trying to deal with the idea of human-centered stress and a reconnection with natural systems is really critical to forming a relationship with essential places on the planet.
And I mean, to add to that as well, I think we're always trying to balance what we put in places that are urbanising. The growth of cities means that we need buildings, we need places for people to live, but what we need to do is, in order to recognise that need, and I think, again, that's become particularly significant to people personally through COVID, and actually realising that there's a need for those sort of those release valves in the more highly urbanised places in particular, and that we've got an opportunity to really relook and rethink about how we are using some spaces and maybe re-embrace spaces that we took for granted, and actually see new roles for them and new ways of delivering them.
Yeah, I think also the way that the few spaces that have been done in Brisbane well and how people have responded to them has really proven that people really gravitate to those spaces and they're looking for memorable experiences. We find in our apartment buildings, when the greenery overlay comes through, it gets more and more positive responses, and therefore the next project we try to embrace through that. But also with the public realm space, that there is a lack of that sort of essential overlay in those spaces, and the ones that do have it are seeing a lot more people gravitating to them. So I think our councils and other clients and developers need examples to prove that people will embrace those spaces. And I think Brisbane's got a couple of really great examples, and it's an exciting couple of years, I think, to extend beyond that.
Yeah.
But tapping into learning from other places, like I think it was in the 80s or 90s in Japan where they coined the term forest bathing, which is a wonderful concept, and you can be prescribed a walk in the forest, Cathryn, if you're feeling a little out of sorts, and your doctor will say, I think you need to go outside now and just engage with nature. And so it's being drawn into the broader kind of social system of how we live in urbanised areas, and it's been proven that I think something like 70% of people that will take that walk for an hour will feel much better from a mental health perspective compared to the opposite. So if you go for a walk through a shopping centre, again, your senses are kind of not really firing. Half of those people will actually go the other way and feel more depressed after going to a place like that. So,
well, we've certainly seen it through COVID, and sympathies to our Victorian friends who are locked in or have been locked in and couldn't even really get out. How important it was just to even be outside, and people walking their dog 4 or 5 times a day just for an excuse to get outside. So we know that they're so important for our mental health, and those stats are really interesting. Simon, I was reading recently you got a nod from David Attenborough for your Aria's fantastic visionary work at South Brisbane with the urban forest development. How important is I guess a nod like that from someone who's so renowned? He basically said, let's bring greenery back to the city. What does that do for Brisbane, putting us on the map? But what does it do for I guess, the pursuit of integrating greenery into buildings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we've been trying in particular, that we don't necessarily see Sydney or Melbourne as the leading light for Australia. There's some incredible architecture here in Brisbane, and probably more so in smaller scale housing in the past. I mean, so many of the national architectural awards in housing in particular has been based in Brisbane, but we don't see any reason why when someone comes to Australia they should be going to Melbourne to look at architecture. I mean, our subtropical climate's so amazing that in a perfect world we want people coming here. Just like I go to Singapore and I go to New York, and because I go to look at buildings, and various people are like that, and there's a whole economy in it. But we'd love to. There's no reason why in the next 5 years Brisbane can't be that. And little nods from David Attenborough and Richard Hassel from WOHA has certainly come out in strong support of it as well. It's just of saying that sometimes buildings and cities just need catalyst things.
Yeah, it's symbolic,
to
isn't it?
The interest, and the concept of buildings with landscape on top can be seen as, and some people would say it's greenwashing because you just plant a tree, what's it doing? Obviously the building needs to be sustainable, needs to have energy efficiency and a whole load of overlays. But the biggest problem with rating tools, I suppose, is that most of the good stuff is in the ground or hidden, and it's operational. The beauty of the trees is people see it. And we love the fact that someone who's not living in one of our buildings walks past, sees it from a kilometre. If it's got trees on the roof, if it's got trees on the building, and certainly on the ground plane, they can't help but interact with it, and it just immediately starts to get them thinking that that's a different way of building, as opposed to so many concrete boxes all over the place. So I think it's an important part, but the operational efficiency and energy efficiency and water recycling and all these other bits that are incredibly important as well. The trees on a building, and as I think David Attenborough's thing was sort of the whole rewilding our cities, which is a fantastic concept, and even vertical farming and all that stuff to bring the produce closer to where the people are, has obviously been proven in other places, and we would love to think that Brisbane could be the forerunner, because as far as we're concerned, it's the most subtropical city in Australia, and therefore it's going to be very attractive to people all over the world and in Australia. And if our architecture can be one of those things, and our public realm and our public art, all those bits and pieces, I think it just builds this whole story for when people come. They're not just saying, I want to go to the Opera House. When I go to Australia, I want to go to Brisbane because of so many different overlays.
Yeah, I think, I'd agree completely. I think the unique climate that you have in Southeast Queensland really does open up opportunities to embrace the idea of giving people more opportunity to actually be in nature, as part of like an urban lifestyle, it doesn't have to be sort of the house and the garden and a more rural idea. You really can sort of densify an environment and sort of introduce more opportunities for people to inhabit space. I think when the talk title came through to me, and back to what you said about the word essential, thinking about Brisbane, I started to think, well, what are those essential spaces? And for me, there are opportunities, exactly like shown by your building, in also the streets, to really kind of create places that are actually for the whole community to enjoy and aren't just conduits for traffic. Really rethinking the role of our streets in the way we live our lives, as well as also in those sort of those higher density buildings, giving people really thinking hard about the balcony and the role of a balcony as a replacement for higher density buildings have great communal facilities, but they also still need to have those personal, kind of spaces as well. And again, in this environment where you have phenomenal, climate, there's no reason why those really can't embrace and integrate. And I think there's a bit of design adaptation that we all need to keep working hard to do. Those spaces really can become kind of, verdant, blooming with greenery and enjoyable, pleasurable and practical, basically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So there's on this topic, we zoom in and out, kind of yo-yo in and out from the human experience and how we read place and what makes us feel great, brought it out to the kind of city scale perspective. So the reason why you would cover a building in vegetation is at a macro scale to ensure you drop the heat load of the city. So what's happening is we're building very high density cities and they're really hot and they hold their heat, and that's a real issue. And that actually results in deaths at both ends of the age spectrum, has been proven. So healthier cities are places that you want to be in, are not just about what you see, but it's about how it makes you feel. And the streets are a huge part of that. I agree, Cathryn, because all the kind of connective bits around the city where you walk. So if I had the option to walk the kids to school because the streets are so shady, there's that little pocket park on the corner, you get bits of that in Brisbane, I think, but we need a network of connectivity which links up your high streets, your little corner parks, your schools. So anywhere that stops you wanting to go get the car keys out and go, I'll just drive that 5 minutes down to get a coffee or not. And we're seeing a lot of people walking around now. So the other part of a shady, walkable city, we did some research in a job called the Green Grid, where it just is about getting people out and mobile. And before the bushfires and before the COVID thing, we were talking about the obesity epidemic. And so there's this whole push today for a sedentary lifestyle. We all sit in chairs. Here we are now. Whereas in other places in the world, they have walking meetings. We could have had a walking interview for this. That would have been interesting. But getting people moving is a huge reduction in the global health burden that's going to hit future generations. So
and I think that's
it's all connected.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's backed up by in recent years definitely this connection between human health and the public realm and how we use the public realm. So the UN produced a habitat report that in 2013 that reflected on people or cities needing to really reconsider the design of streets as having a much more complex provision for the way people sort of inhabit cities. Also, not long after that, in 2016, The Lancet also produced a series of articles which directly connected the relationship between how we move and how we're able to move, the opportunities we have, and human health and well-being. And again, just to come back to obviously the recent COVID experience, again, that reinforcement of the relationship between the places we create, how we design them, and human health and well-being. Yeah.
I always tell my kids that, if you talk to strangers, you'll live for longer, but you've got to have streets and places that will encourage that. It's been proven actually that if your local shopkeeper knows who you are, and if you're looking a bit clammy and off one day, they're more likely to say you're right. But if you don't, engage socially. So the streets have to facilitate that social engagement.
I have a little. I catch the bus or I cycle quite a lot because I'm kind of quite close to the city, and I have a fascination with taking photographs at bus stops. Just in terms of looking at
this is the next talk, isn't it?
But it's fascinating in terms of seeing where people are stood. The bus stop is supposed to be there as a shelter. It's a bus shelter. But typically, and I think one of the slides I've put in, which is the street, you can see that the morning commute, people are actually sheltered behind the bus stop in the shade, or they're stood 10 metres down from the bus stop in the shade of a tree. And sort of just rethinking how fit for purpose to support that kind of type of lifestyle our streets really are. I think it's a great
advertising
opportunity.
platform, though.
Say again?
Terrific advertising platform.
Yeah, there it is. And someone even once stood in the shadow of the bus stop pillar, I noticed as well, just to get that shade while they waited for the bus. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity to recognise that and really do sort of embrace the opportunity we've got to increase the vegetation in the city and therefore its identity and character.
And I think we need to shift the dial as well around trees. They're not just a maintenance thing that drop leaf litter, but they're, we need to love our vegetation and our street trees. And, maybe that's a campaign for the future.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the old reptilian brain part of the conversation, there's a fear of nature which is embodied in a lot of society generally, and it results in all sorts of chemicals and maintenance regimes. But through our research, we found that we went down to Melbourne and Sydney and spoke to some of the guys that are running great urban tree programs, and you get so much more value out of one big tree than you do out of lots of little ones in a city. Think about Eagle Street, the figs down there. They're just such beautiful things. There's 3 or 4 different species down there. They change through the year. And the new building by BBN next door really celebrates that. So there's a way that those spaces can become iconic for a city in the same way a bridge does or a building.
Yeah. But I think definitely in that urban space, I mean, it's an unexpected setup. So, I mean, we were talking about the design of a public space, and I talk about Fish Lane more because it's what we've had a lot to do with. Over a period of 5 years, the foot traffic's gone from 200 a day to 7,000 a day because it's been designed in a certain way, but that's not just say an Adelaide's laneways that have got amazing bars, and at night time from 10 till 2 they're amazing. But if you go there at 9 o'clock in the morning, everything's shut and it feels a bit weird. I think the beauty of Brisbane's laneways is the fact that it's about light and air, and if you can deal with it from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and bring in, that's where the public art setup comes, so that during the day people have got something to look at. So there's a reason to meander through that space. But also if you can then bring some greenery into an urban laneway, even if it's only one tree, people tend to gravitate to it. I mean, our Town Square project, which has got nearly 2,000 plants in it now and about 45 trees, which opens in a couple of weeks, I think that's a real opportunity because everyone's thinking laneways is just asphalt and hardscape, and then they're going to come under that rail line and all of a sudden it's this sort of oasis of tree ferns and what have you, which will just be something they haven't seen before. And therefore they'll want to come and sit there and dwell. But I think that's the opportunity in the urban environment, because there really just isn't enough of that space, and it enlivens that essentialness.
Yeah, it's got to work harder, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'll just reflect, and just to throw in another stat. Oh, yeah, sorry. Just to throw in another stat as well, just with regards to how Fish Lane is utilising space, that, it's about reimagining how we use that space that's available to us. It's not easy to find space to create a new park. The UN Habitat report sort of suggested that I think 90% of the public realm is actually made up of streets. So there's the opportunity to really add, enjoyable space, recreational space, if we just sort of really do embrace what a street can be. And I think 25% of an urban environment typically is the street. So it's a huge opportunity, and Fish Lane's going to be fascinating when it opens. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah,
but I mean, Singapore's a prime example. We always hark back to that because 30 years ago they just made a decision it was going to be a garden city, and maybe it's easy when your local state and fed is all in a 50k radius and they own a lot of the land, but they just made a decision that this is where it's going to be. We're going to incentivise people to the point where you'd be a fool to not do it. And then they take the incentive away because it's standard. But I love walking the streets of Singapore because even though it's an incredibly dense city, there's always a green buffer between you and a car. It's, Brisbane, you can walk 30 centimetres from cars buzzing by. And trees, and they've just made the rule your footpaths need to be in a certain setup so that the pedestrian experience is a green element. You might have a 60-storey building just next to you, but your immediate experience is that the softness of the landscape.
And it translates to city performance as well, doesn't it? I mean, Singapore not only is a green city, but it's, it's the most livable city, even though it's highly dense. So we're seeing lots of those positive outcomes around the place.
Yeah.
Thinking back to Aria and what you've been doing, you are setting a benchmark, and I wondered, what is it that people really love, and why do they buy into an Aria project? What are the places that are humming? What are the people who you buy from you? What are they saying?
Yeah, we often talk about there's 4 parts to our buildings. The apartment that you buy is obviously an important part, but it's about 25% of the whole deal. The public realm and the retail, and not selling the retail off because you don't want a 7-Eleven or a bottle-o turning up. You need to be able to curate that sort of arrival sequence for your residents. The rooftop areas, which over 5 or 6 years and about 10 projects, we've sort of, Vine 6 years ago, it was a 150 square metre open space with some bushes and a spa and a pergola, and everyone thought it was amazing back then because Brisbane never really did that for some reason. But over 5 or 6 years, that's grown to the point where urban forest is 4,500 square metre rooftop with nearly 300 trees and a couple of thousand plants on just the rooftop area. But it's because every single building we've delivered, that's the point of difference between what other people have done. That's what drives rental yield, because somebody will pay $100 more to stay in this building to the one next door. But it also goes to prove that there's certainly other people who will do dining rooms and barbecue areas and what have you. But if they're not done properly, and that's where the greenery comes in. If a rooftop is hardscape with maybe a pergola and a place to sit in our sun, you're only going to be there for 10 minutes. But if you can bring in that green overlay and then bring in full cover, half cover, perforated sort of cover, so that you can let people tailor how they use the space. But my job is in every project is about trying to bring, so what's the next evolution when I stand still, so that we get the intel from the people who are in the building, and the dining room gets used a lot. Therefore, the next projects are sort of morphed that into, there might be a dining room, but there's also a lounge that you don't have to book per se. It's just about creating this opportunity so that the rooftops in particular can have 30 groups inhabiting it, not just some of the original ones. Maybe 5 groups are up there and you come out of the lift and you think, oh, there's too many people up here. But now, at Oxley and Stirling rooftop, you could have 25 groups up there and they wouldn't feel like they're on top of each other. So it's just providing that amenity, but then designing it in a way that it feels comfortable and warm, and there's something that just makes you want to stay there. This concept of an essential space, you can provide the space, but if it isn't wrapped and dealt with in a certain way by a crafted designer, no one's going to want to stay there, whereas we want people dwelling in these spaces for half a day.
You remember when we were going through that design process pre-DA, we talked about a range of experiences as well. So, you know what it's like when you get to the communal roof deck in a tower, and there's Bob from Unit 47, and I really don't want to speak to Bob at the moment, and I've got nowhere to go. I'm rabbit in a headlight, but with the double level rooftop design, you can come out at a different level. You can get a look at what's going on. You can duck around the other way. You can choose your adventure really, and that's the same for the balconies. I know Cathryn wants to have a chat about that as well. But the big balconies you guys are putting forward, and it's incredible civic leadership, I think, on the part of Aria to sort of keep pushing this. What's best for this place and what is best on the planet, not just what's happening in Brisbane. But the balconies in mid-COVID, we were talking about how well you can actually live out on this balcony. It's big enough to do that. The planting's one thing, but the functional opportunities are the really important thing.
Yeah, and I think again, sort of looking forward in terms of design, really, all of us keeping sort of pushing, and the key thing that keeps coming up is making sure that they're habitable. Sort of for humans and for ecology, and that they're, in order for, sort of green buildings, sometimes you can see buildings that have tried and that there hasn't been a consideration about the longevity of how a landscape, which is a growing thing, an evolving thing, can be maintained. So the way the balconies and the buildings are designed, really having to think and put energy into thinking about how people use space. Comfort for different kinds of people in spaces, but also the practical side of providing people with a balcony that's big enough, has a tap, for example, or space for your laundry, so that they really are usable space. And again, we touched on this when we were chatting earlier. If a space isn't loved, if a space can't be used, it isn't loved, it doesn't have value, and therefore it becomes a redundant thing, or people don't care or cherish for it, and it becomes something else, or just goes into decline. So making sure in the design of landscapes in places, no matter where they are, on the ground or in buildings, we make sure that they're places that people will really can cherish, can interact with, is really key to their success, I think.
So why haven't we been doing more of this? I mean, if you think about Brisbane and the subtropical city, why aren't there more developers out there looking at green buildings, and why aren't we loading up our streets with greenery? What are some of the barriers? And
well, I can talk to our city plan has been written in a way that there's a certain amount of stories you're allowed on a development site, and a green rooftop with a single roof effectively counted as a story. So now, but in the past in particular, that was essentially a floor of units that people couldn't build. 10, 12 units, it's $5 million of revenue that's not there, that you've already paid for the land. And also the green roofs cost more. Like, I know that our apartment floors cost us $2,000 a square metre to build, and our rooftops are $5,000 a square metre to build. So they're more expensive. But Brisbane City Council has acknowledged it. I mean, there's a policy that's just about to come out, which is the garden rooftops. If you create a garden rooftop, that is no longer going to count as a story. So it's as long, you can't put a unit up there, but if you've got landscaping of a certain quantity and quality and depth, and rooms that are amenity, that council's now, and I think it's probably coming out pre-Christmas, I think, that just gets rid of that barrier. And we definitely find, even though that rooftop is more expensive to build in a unit, the value that drives is immense, and it's an ongoing value. So the person who buys the unit, but also the concept of the renters will pay more, but also the renters are enjoying living there more and they don't want to leave. And we hold our management rights, so we've got an ingrained idea of holding on to those renters. So it's, I think part of it is a planning reason why it hasn't happened a lot. I think you're seeing it a lot more now. I think people are starting to see now that there's been 5, 6, 7 examples, and a lot of them being ours, that there is a real desire for it in the public, and therefore I think everyone just needs to see examples. And government in particular needs to see examples to point at it, and just Fish Lane in particular was one of those things where we tried to do Block 1 and hit so many roadblocks at every point, but once they saw Block 1 worked, Block 2 got a little easier, and Block 4 was, I won't say a walk in the park because it wasn't necessary, but it's people just say, okay, well, you're doing that, and that worked. Whereas if you're trying to do something ahead of, because before that, the only real rooftops were, strangely enough, Melbourne, with ridiculously inclement weather. with these amazing rooftop spaces that were in outdoor cinemas and what have you, and then the rain would come through and they'd all have to run away. But that was the forerunner of why we started, because we'd been to a bunch of great rooftops in Melbourne, to be honest, and then just built from there. But yeah, the planning impediment's about to be taken away, which is going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think, to talk to streets, and it's highly contested space. The street is a space that so many people have access to. There are so many demands put on a very small area within a city. That basically, how you coordinate that to reimagine what it can be rather than just business as usual. And I think to put a positive on sort of the COVID experience, it's created a disruptor that's actually required people to actually see a different way. So what we need to do is, I think there's an opportunity to really sort of embrace that energy and get all of the people who have a stake in our streets to maybe just take a bit of time to rethink, okay, going forward, let's balance the demands on the street in terms of vehicle movement, pedestrian movement, vegetation and services and infrastructure. So I think there's a process there that there is an opportunity to pull a lot more minds together than necessarily just the sort of the traditional road engineering thinking around a street.
Yeah, thinking of streets as essential places, as opposed to just functional conduits for various services and infrastructure. Yeah. So it's about making them a place.
Yeah, and it is complex. I'm not undermining in any way how complex it is, because there's the issue of risk and safety, which then instantly becomes a challenge, which not blocks but sort of makes a conversation difficult to move forward. But I think it's a perfect time to reconsider it, definitely.
But I think one of the most interesting parts of our urban forest project that's going, as much as 1,000 trees in a building is what grabs the headlines, is the idea of Glenelg Street, which connects Musgrave Park and Southbank, two incredibly important public spaces in the city. Glenelg Street's a 4-lane road, so you've got a 3-metre footpath on either side, and then 4 lanes in the middle. The biggest thing that we're really loving about this project is Glenelg Street coming back to 2 lanes, so that then you've got 2 larger footpaths that can start to have double lanes of trees. So, because it's about encouraging the foot traffic from one park to another. Right now, it's not a terribly nice walk because it's asphalt and hard stand. And to be honest, the traffic modelling shows it, and BCC is quite open to the concept. But it really means that then it's a pedestrianised dominant space, and the cars are part of the story, instead of right now you definitely feel like you're a bit player and the cars are everything. Even though we've proved the 4 lanes aren't used much at all, they only need 2. It just feels like you're the bit player because there's so many lanes of cars there.
Australia is a bit of a victim of its evolution. It's been designed around the car. It came of age with the car. You look to Europe and, the car has been reinserted into existing urban fabric. So it's, one of the challenges for us is actually reclaiming and putting people first and bringing nature into those spaces. And it is hard at times to convince people, but I think what we're saying is natural spaces are essential, and spaces for people to be well are core to our livability and our wellness. So hopefully we're on the right track in many respects. Yeah. Damian, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, the other thing is that it's all about the speed of engagement with the environment as well. So you're in a car, you're in your hermetically sealed bubble. You're not engaging with the senses either. So when you're walking and cycling, and we're hoping that with COVID, that with a lot more people we've noticed anecdotally on the streets walking and with their kids and so on, is that slowing down and really looking at our city and how great it is. On Glenelg Street, there's beautiful big figs there that are just kind of hanging on. They're just I don't know how they got there, but they're amazing big shady things. So celebrate them, join the dots, connect the bits between the park and the river. And if we keep pushing for those critical connections, we'll make a great city in the end.
Yeah, I think, you can almost imagine sort of landscape and natural vegetation becoming this connective tissue, can't you? That not only it supports human habitat, but also just in the way that we can manage what you were saying before about heat island, climate change, water management in terms of, sort of high, peak climate events where we have, big storms, collection of water, which again is about us thinking more holistically about public spaces as a system of things rather than just singular things.
And thinking back, I mean, you know, obviously water resilience is another challenge. We go through droughts here and, you know, water restrictions and that is, I guess, you know, that has had damaging impact on the way we consider lush landscape because people are a bit fearful about, you know, or it might, you know, we can't maintain it. So do you think that's a factor? And how do we address that so that we
just have to get better at understanding the complexities of nature, you know, it's seasonal, it's altitude, it's moisture, it's all those things. So embracing complexity generally is a good thing, I think, in life, and, you know, and having a crack at things and really researching your work before you move into a big step. But yeah, a simple view of landscape as the green thing is changing, I think. We're seeing a much more integrated view of how we engage with nature, and that's why I think even, you know, we talk about the Singapore example a lot. There's a guy, Richard Hassel, over there. He found some crabs on his level 4, little vampire crabs on his level 4 garden bed. And, you know, he was like, wow. And then they disappeared. And then this really big gecko turned up and ate them. So there's this idea that nature will evolve and adapt along with us if we let it. But if we don't give it the right kind of substrate to grow into, then that will never happen. And so the thing about, you know, what we see as green is not just that, it's the tip of the iceberg to a deeper understanding of integrated living with nature, which is what the objective is, I think.
But I think the idea of resilience is important. I mean, you can't propose a building with plants all over it and just assume it's going to rain. It doesn't matter how big your rainwater tank is if it doesn't rain. So there's obviously ideas of stormwater mining. There's always and South Bank certainly taps into that concept. Our project, I mean, greywater recycling on certain scale works. On a smaller scale, it's a little bit more problematic, and that's certainly the idea on this urban forest building. It's the amount of water that a building of that scale uses every day is immense, and to be honest, water is almost too cheap. Therefore, people keep using it. Whereas I really love the idea that the wastewater from the tenants is the thing that is allowing the trees to thrive, even down to food and organic waste and all that sort of stuff. It's not just about recycling plastics and what have you. It's the waste that is generated from the building then gets composted and forms the fertiliser of the 9,000 square metres of planters in the building. So I think there's a responsibility on the part of the larger catalyst projects, because it's not good enough. And to be honest, I mean, it probably involves the person who built it staying involved in the project, and managing the project is important, because it's not good enough to just say that it didn't rain, you know? Because, I mean, we see the plants on our buildings in particular, the best material we've got. So just constantly evolving, and 3 years later, they're better than they were when they first went in. They flower, they're seasonal, but you need to look after them. That's, you know, you can't just...
You've got to love them. It's got to be a curated thing, you know. Any garden is that. You need to take care of it. And while you were talking, I was reminded of you speaking basically of the kind of closed loop mindset, which is both social and economic and natural as well, which is starting to kind of find its way into a lot of city scale thinking. And I know you're talking about a lot of that with your work. And it reminded me of a book that I stole from Cathryn about 10, 15 years ago by a chap called William McDonough. I promised to give it back. I'll give it to you. Which is his cradle-to-cradle kind of ethos, and how he convinced the Ford Motor Company back last century to clad all of their car plants in PV cells, because it made better financial sense, you know, rather than the actual thing. That's kind of evolved into a whole other way of integrating nature into natural systems. The respect for resources is part of that. It's not just the green stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was just thinking it's so much more about people feeling part of the places that live, part of the street that they're in, and actually kind of, and just thinking about something that Melbourne did with regards to the street trees, where I think they gave every tree an email address, and they asked people to write emails, and they didn't know what to expect. But this amazing story of kind of love stories to trees that people appreciated, because we take them for granted. So I think, you know, the success of this, the more we can get people to, you know, recognise their role in kind of in making the city greener and more inhabited and more ecological is a really important aspect as well, that you actually feel like you can. I think that's one of the great things about, for example, the verges that have been adopted by local communities and been planted up and aren't just, sort of grass to be mown and a cost. They've actually been adopted and people are planting their own vegetation. Some of it's productive landscape as well, so you can actually grow your tomatoes or whatever. Getting people to really connect with a relationship with the places they live, I think is it's kind of in tune, I guess, with the landscape, which is a living thing. Bring the two things together.
Damian, you're working on a really exciting new park for Brisbane, which is, as Cathryn pointed out, a real rarity. It is actually transforming a green space but making it public. Do you want to share some insights?
Vic Park?
I'm talking about Vic Park, yes. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's in the context of big shifts and leadership, I think, in the same way that Aria are doing that at that scale. But in this instance, it's, we're not a huge fan of single-use, land-use anything. Complexity is a good thing. You get surprise and delight out of that. You don't get it out of knowing that it's just the one thing every time. So Vic Park is an amazing asset to the city just north of the CBD. It's totally disconnected at the moment, both kind of emotionally, physically, ecologically. And the job there with the vision is to actually bring people back into this place and understand its complex layered history. So there's a storytelling component to this place, which is fascinating. You might be able to go down there and actually learn how to kayak. There are schools all around there, like there's a State High next to the urban forest. Yeah. We'll be able to embrace the community and bring them into this place, and they can actually love it, and develop over generations a way of interacting with the place. So it's not a kind of one-trick pony vision at the moment. It's a beautiful, complex thing which evolved out of thousands of conversations with the community pre and post and during the process. We had some great open days on site. So again, listening in a creative mindset is a huge part of that kind of thing, and I think it's going to be a wonderful asset for the city. It's a beautiful place, wooded landscape, great views back to the city, somewhere where, if you did have a visitor, you would bring them out there for the day, just like you go to River Quay to sit on the lawn there and look out over the city, which is another beautiful place. It's going to be one of those parts of the city, and well connected with the people around there. And there's no residential on there, so that's the other part of leadership, right? Taking a really good, strong line and saying, this is public space. This is important to not just now, but for the next 20 generations, because as the city evolves and grows, these spaces become more and more important. So get them connected, get them loved, get them curated, and get people really engaged with them from day one, not just with the walking in, opening the gate thing, but also the design of it, which has been what the vision's been all about.
You're one of the few people who's not a golfer who's probably been on the site. Most of us have experienced it from the inner city bypass.
I think Simon's seen my golf. It was, I collect golf clubs. They're in the shed. They haven't been touched for 30 years, I don't think.
So here's a question. As Brisbaneites, what's your favourite space, or natural space that you love? That's a loaded. That was an unprepared question.
This was unscripted.
Very unscripted.
I'll go. I'm happy to. There's one that instantly springs to my mind, which is the intersection of where the Goodwill comes down at QUT, and you've got those enormous figs.
The Hoochie Fong corner, the sculpture.
With and the figs have been lit up with the nighttime, and hidden in the trees there's a few sculptures, and just for me, that I love that space. You get shade, it's cool, there's a lot of life, there's people moving around that are going to the university, they're going to the city to go to work. And you've got the water edge, which obviously is a key natural feature and characteristic of Brisbane's identity as well. So that little spot there, the intersection where you come off the water, hit the land, and you've got the trees, that as a natural space that I love.
So a great segue into green bridges, which we'll come to maybe after. But no, that's a good one. Simon, you've had a bit of time to think. It's a hard one.
I think I'm supposed to say Fish Lane, but maybe I'm not at that level, but I mean, I love the idea of watching an act or a band play at River Stage with the trees around you and the river behind you. I just think it's a really Brisbane way of doing an outdoor, and I love going to see bands play. It's so much different to going to Boondall and seeing the same band play, and that's that connection to nature, but also just enjoying time with your friends and being so close to the city, but being in such a natural space. So.
Yeah, I've been lucky to work on and really get to know lots of places in the city, and the first thing that sprang to mind as a child at Moreton Bay was the river, actually, and being on the water and watching all the different nuances of those interactions, because a lot of the high streets in Brisbane run perpendicular down to the ferry stop. So there's this great kind of layered transaction between the community and the river and how they got around. Oxford Street, Bulimba is a good example of that. But then I think in terms of a place, I love the potential of Captain Burke Park under the bridge opposite Howard Smith Wharves. It's one of these beautiful, big, old, green, graceful parks, big shade trees, hasn't been messed with too much. People use it a lot. Kangaroo Point as a community is actually the most dense population in the city, but you wouldn't know it because then the streets are really shady and it's got some great stuff going on, good pub. So that place to me, it's where the Hells Angels used to race their Harley Davidsons back in the day. There's a story of a headless ghost down there. There's all these stories of the city that you don't know about until you start to dig around. So I go down there, as the sun's going down, you never know what you'll see. So Captain Burke Park for me is great because it's got the river, it's got the city, it's got the bridge overhead, it's got the noise of the jazz club, which is another great institution, and it hasn't been overly kind of messed with.
So it's interesting that all three of you have picked spaces that are basically on the river and have an engagement. So, we often, looked at the river's edge strategy, how important Brisbane River is as an essential natural space. Like Brisbane really has
it's a good one.
Has a point of difference from other cities in that we've switched our thinking, and the river is now, at the centerpiece of open space, and we've really re-embraced it in many positive ways.
What's your favourite space?
Well, I've picked one that isn't, but it is related to water. So I love Yeronga Park Pool because I can swim backstroke surrounded by trees, and it's really special because I'm from Canada where swimming outdoors just doesn't happen. So I get the novelty of that after 20 years still hasn't worn off for me. So anyway, so where to from here, guys? What's the future of Brisbane with natural spaces, outdoor spaces? Where do we go? What does the future hold? That's a big question.
I think you're going to take it from a political perspective, you're going to take it from a community grassroots perspective, and you're going to take it from a commercial activism perspective, which is all the things we've been talking about today. So the future is this continuing conversation. I think we talked earlier today about, before this session, about how you only hear about people complaining about, let's call it fig trees and roots, the problems with nature sometimes. That's what gets traction. We need to flip that conversation and make it all about how awesome it makes you feel. And again, going back to the senses and then the connections into community, I think we just have to keep pushing that line, which is these things are essential to how we feel about this place. And that spins out into the politics of the city. Why would you move your business to Brisbane? Why would you come here for a holiday and stay a few more days? What is it about this place? I guarantee you that everyone thinks about Brisbane as this leafy, lovely place, and let's just play on that in the same way that Singapore has done so successfully. For me, that's what it's about. It's a big push at lots of different levels.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think the climate here means that opportunity is just, sort of the seeds are sown. There are some fantastic, like Vic Park is a fantastic opportunity, but I think really pushing the imagination, getting people to really embrace that outdoor lifestyle, because 90% of the year you could be you don't need the shelter of the building. You just need, sort of the relationship between an external space and a building, maybe a support, and just sort of encouraging people to really kind of, like you said, celebrate it and be vocal about it. Because if I reflect on, for example, the street, my little obsession today, the street is killed by 1,000 cuts that no one feels that they have responsibility for, and it's only when we collectively get together and actually say, no, this is an important piece of the city that we want to enjoy, that you actually, the street trees will stop disappearing overnight, and no one will, at the moment they disappear because infrastructure's put in or whatever, and nobody notices, but it's one more tree gone. And as we densify the trees in back gardens, one more tree gone. So I think again, recognising sort of our collective kind of enjoyment of streets and the need to actually have those as really significant public space going forward is key. Say again?
We need a festival of some kind.
A festival of
essential natural.
Yeah.
But I think, one of the best things that come out of the press and the commentary around our urban forest building has been that nobody thinks trees in a building, on a building, is a bad idea. They're all for it. if the only comment that we get is, gee, that's going to be hard to look after, that's easy. Like, we can manage that issue. There is no one who actually thinks being in an apartment on level 20 with a 25 square metre balcony and a tree right outside your bedroom, nobody thinks that's a bad idea. They can see why that's a good idea. And it's the responsibility of people working the problem to make sure that maintenance-wise, but we can manage that. It's about not walking away. But everyone is in support of greening the space, whether it's the street or our rooftops or our buildings. I don't think anyone has an issue with that as a concept. And the more that our governments, what have you, our local governments hear that that's a positive and that everyone's for it, then I think we'll start to see it more and more. And, I think it's step by step. You can't just step in and just say, all of a sudden, I'm just going to cover it. And our buildings, we've gone from one tree 8 buildings ago to 5 and then 10 and then 30. Treehouse down in West End's got about 110 on it right now. It's about learning how to deal with it so that you take the baby steps. Urban forest is not a baby step; it's a fair step. But if the only negative is, geez, that's going to be hard to look after, that's the best news for me.
It's almost, Damian's probably shared this, is this benchmarking. Like, everybody loves a benchmark, and we look to the world for examples of great things. We need to be convinced, that it works elsewhere and that it can work here. And people pay a lot of money to do benchmarking and analysis of global benchmarks and examples. And I'd love it to see Brisbane be a benchmark that others use to convince themselves that putting trees on a building is a great idea.
Yeah, and I think the key to so much of this, and it was definitely a discussion point in the early 2000s around sustainability, being brave, demonstrating, trying things, being willing to kind of just accept that we might have to tune things as we go, but also sharing the stories of the successes, how they work. That's it, actually sort of sharing the experiences and what it is that made it work so that more people can be confident, take the step themselves. So like conversations like this, so important that we keep sharing, the innovations that are happening, how to make them work. And then more people can kind of,
and also what didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
What
doesn't work.
Don't want to keep repeating something that didn't work. So.
Which is about recognising the fact it's complex. We all know that the built environment and delivering great built environment is complex. It's hard, but there's no reason why we shouldn't just keep pushing.
I think, setting the benchmark very high, and that's why I think everyone, the urban forest has captured the heart and minds of people, because it is, it can be this benchmark that demonstrates that it is possible. It is possible to think big and convince, the number of developers out there who, even commercial buildings, like you're talking specifically about residential, but we're looking at, Mirvac are putting ADN in. It's rich with landscape, at least at the ground plane. We're looking, we work on a number of projects where that is actually core to the outcome, is how greenery is embedded, not just in one typology, but in all different typologies.
And I think celebrating how much people enjoy them. I think recognising human habitation as well as, as well as the technical success, we made it work. It's actually also recognising that people enjoy those spaces and actually really adds to character of place. Is really important.
But even going beyond landscape, the CLT buildings down at King Street are a prime example. That's some fantastic groundbreaking stuff, and it happened in Brisbane. So this stuff doesn't have to happen in Sydney or Melbourne. And that's embracing nature. It's just embracing it in a different way. You're in an office space and you've got these amazing big chunky timber elements where concrete used to be. So, we're certainly of the view that there's no reason why that stuff can't happen in Brisbane.
There are a number of happiness and wellness indices around the world, aren't there? Yeah. So maybe there's a way of tying it back into the human perception of the quality of their existence in many ways. If we can get beyond just the things and come back to us, the voter, the driver, the cyclist, and keep attacking it from what makes us tick and what makes us feel like we're leading rich lives, then we'll start to get the great, closed loop buildings happening. Then we'll start to feel better about how we get around the city.
It's reconnecting that idea that sort of planning and design is as much about human health and kind of habitat creation as it is about kind of delivering, sort of the buildings where people need to have a bed. It's, good design and planning is actually about health and habitat and healthy places for people to
and
live.
leadership in good design and planning is about the intergenerational thinking,
Yeah.
because the now is one thing, but what's left after we're gone is the most important thing. So having that kind of 1,000-year purview at a government scale is what I think is really critical.
And not to harp on David Attenborough, but if anyone's looking for a great Netflix recommendation, you've got to watch his, I can't remember the Planet documentary.
You've got to stick it out. The first 40 minutes, you start
Yeah.
to get a little bit down, but then it ramps up and the solutions.
Yeah, but
at the end.
it is actually transformational.
Yeah, it's
Like
great.
I think everyone owes it to themselves to watch it, and it just kind of resets. About what Damian's saying about this is a legacy that we need to. For our children and their children, we have to leave the world in a better place, and natural spaces and landscape and greenery is central. to that.
2030 is another good one. Is it 2030? It's
Yeah,
another
2030,
great
yeah.
homegrown version of that.
So Brisbane Open House is, different this year. So we can say to people, you don't have to go into a building, because what we're saying is just get out into the streets, get out into the parks, get out and see the different side of Brisbane and what Brisbane has to offer. And I think, all the panellists here have shared with you some of their favourite spots. So Damian, maybe has some stories he can share around Captain Burke Park. I didn't know there's a ghost, but, there's lots of opportunities for us to enjoy what is an absolutely amazing fabric. And we'll look really forward to Aria opening up Fish Lane, which is set to December. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it should be open by 1st December. Yep.
That'll be very exciting. So that's already a successful precinct, and you can see snippets of it through the rail structure, and the greenery is starting to explode to life. So that'll be a really fantastic one. So, and I know we've got about 3 minutes remaining. Are we happy to wrap up? So look, this has been a fantastic chat. Congratulations to Brisbane Open House. We look forward to the rest of the speaker series that are planned. So hopefully everyone will tune in. And thank you very much to Damian, Cathryn and Simon. Fantastic as always. Great chat. Damian, please give Cathryn her book back after 15 years. That would be lovely. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you everyone who's here in studio. And we'll see you next year at the next round of Brisbane
Thanks,
Open
Nat.
House. So thank you.
Thank you.